So just a brief outline of the presentation. I'll be looking at brief reintroduction history. There's a few other people in this room that have much better knowledge of that than me. And then through the current elephant management plan. Obviously we don't have time to go through all the thinking and everything behind the current elephant management plan. So I'll just touch on the overall objectives of the plan, include a bit of vegetation monitoring and elephant movement patterns. So historically, you would have heard in earlier presentations from RISA, elephants were widespread in Zululand. The last elephants within the boundaries of HRP was reportedly shot by John Dunn in 1890. The first proposal to reintroduce elephants into the HRP area was tabled in 1974. And reasons given for those reintroductions were that elephants previously occurred in the area and had been locally extinct for approximately 100 years. And in that time, it was Natal Parks Board policy to introduce animals back into areas where they had been extinct or locally extinct before. In addition, one of the reasons put forward was to reintroduce the effects on the woody vegetation in order to redress bush encroachment, to improve the status of elephants as a threatened species, and then to add to the biological and conservation status of the two reserves. So also from Lisa's talk, you would have seen the two reserves were still split back in those days. At the time, there was concerns around the reintroduction, that elephants might break out of the park, that they themselves might cause damage when breaking out, or allow other animals to escape and cause damage as well. Obviously, they may damage the vegetation to an unacceptable level. There was obvious concerns around the selection of endangered or endemic plant species and the scarp forest habitat that is also conserved within Hluhluwe. Already said, sneakily they hoped that the elephants would reverse the trend of bush encroachment. A fixed upper limit was set with the provision to change, and then they realized that food selection and vegetation monitoring was essential when elephants were introduced. They also looked at the cost implications. So back in the day, it would have cost them an annual budget of about 7,626 Rand to reintroduce elephants each year, which is about the cost of now repairing a geyser. Thanks for laughing, Paul. That's my last joke for the day. The introductions were staggered. They took place from 1981 through to 1996. Over this time period, 174 elephants were introduced. In 2010, adult bulls were introduced from Kruger. The staggering of these introductions took place because the animals were obviously young animals, orphans from Culls and Kruger, and the management wanted to set up a natural demographic structure as soon as possible. So that's why they brought in these youngsters every single year. Initially, some of these results, there were some deaths during the introductions. This was put down to being young orphans with no adults. All the animals formed one group that moved around together when they were let out of their holding bomas. They didn't test the fence, so one of the concerns was fine. They only used small areas within the park. They were fitted with VHF collars, so they could be found. And there was fairly good, from what I can see, food selection monitoring done just prior to and just after the introduction of the elephants. And there was no concern seen. In the medium term, since then, the population has aged. It's split into smaller breeding groups. The first calf was born in the park in 1990, and since then things have gone crazy. High growth rate has been modeled at 7.7%, age of sexual maturity at 9 years, and intercalving interval of about 3 years. So a very fast growing population, as has been seen in all the small orphan introduced populations. As can be expected, or has been known now, no decrease in bush encroachment due to the effect of elephants. And then something that was also no one knew would happen is rhinocidal elephants. A huge amount of white and black rhinos were killed by elephants in the 10 years from 1991 to 2001. 58 white rhino and 8 black rhino. So that was where I mentioned earlier those 10 bulls were brought in 2000, was to try and deal with that. In 2008, the national norms and standards for the management of elephants in South Africa was promulgated. It requires every owner who has elephants on their property to write an elephant management plan. The HRP, as Jabulani mentioned, the HRP, the Atala, and the Tembe elephant management plans were the first in South Africa to be signed off by the National Minister in 2012. In the HRP elephant management plan, and then I think for most of the management plans that Ezemvelo has done, elephant management plans, the objectives of the elephant management plan are derived from the integrated management plan of the park. So the HRP elephant management plan objectives in priority order is to maintain the elephant population in a state that does not jeopardize the conservation of biodiversity elements, priority biological assets, or the maintenance of ecological processes within the park. So elephants in this context are seen as not having as important a conservation priority as certain other elements within the elements within the park. To maintain a genetically viable population of elephants with a demographic structure reflective of natural mature elephant populations, and then to ensure that risks to human infrastructure and livelihoods inside and outside the park are minimized. So in order to do that, there's obviously the format of the norms and standards has got a whole bunch of additional information that's needed, but when it comes down to actually managing the elephant population, we came up with basically two ways of doing it. The one was a detailed management action and intervention tables, and then a list of sensitive habitats and species. With the detailed management action and intervention tables, it works similarly to the thresholds of potential concern. There's separate tables that relate to the three objectives, so the management of priority species or habitats, the demographic structure of elephants, and then the risks to human livelihoods and infrastructure. They're pretty extensive tables, cover a good number of pages, so I'm just going to go through just one example to show you how they work. Right on the left-hand side, we've got the element of concern. In this case, I've just pulled out the ones relating to rhino. So mortality of white rhino on the top, elephant attack on black rhino at the bottom. Then you've got these columns referring to a poor rating, a fair rating, a good rating, and a very good rating. So that's what the management team put down as poor. They don't want that fair rating. So for white rhino, if you look at the target is very good, which is no negative interactions between elephant and white rhino. The current rating is very good, so at the stage that the management plan was written and still today, there's no negative interactions between elephants and white rhino. The trigger is fair, so when you move from your very good rating through to a good rating of negative interactions between elephant and rhino, non-fatal injury to rhino, when you get to a non-fatal injury to rhino, that then triggers your management action, which is on the right-hand side. The culprit needs to be identified, which is usually done through photographic evidence. Assess and monitor the situation, and then if the rating reaches poor, identify the culprit and destroy it. So once an elephant kills a white rhino, then that elephant will be destroyed. Black rhino is slightly different. Again, the target is very good, the current rating is very good, but the trigger at this point is good. So when there's negative interactions between elephant and rhino, that then triggers the management action of identifying the culprit and assessing and monitoring the situation. If it then moves through to a fair rating, in this case, then the culprit is identified and destroyed. So you can see there's differences between this, and it switches through to your priority habitats and other things like that. Obviously, what I haven't mentioned is the other two, is the demographics. So there's triggers and management actions associated around the demographics. There's triggers and management actions associated around impact on humans and human livelihoods. Then, just to move through to the list of sensitive habitats and species and how sort of that fits into the management plan. Under each sensitive habitat, so for example under the scarp forest, there's a list of what is the existing monitoring, what's the intended monitoring, what are the current management actions, and what additional research is required. So just to look at one of these, I'll focus on research questions which are highlighted in the elephant management plan that are relevant to vegetation. So here I've grouped a few things together, the scarp forest habitat and then rare and endangered plant species. So vegetation data, elephant impact data has been collected in 1999, 2003 and 2007. Plots were distributed throughout the vegetation types and throughout the park. Involved stratified sampling of quarter-hectare plots, but not all plots were resampled each year. But it is a pretty massive data set. So one of the questions we asked, this, as I mentioned, is only a very small subset of the questions that were asked of this data set based on the elephant management plan, but do current transects efficiently and effectively sample all the habitat types? So another bit of a rendergram here, but the black lines or black bars represent the proportion of that vegetation type within the whole park. Then you move through to the white bars, then the proportion of transects that were sampled in 1999 in each of those habitat types. The grey ones then is 2003 and the hatched ones 2007. So what we're looking at here is there an even spread of the transects, of the proportion of transects sampled in each of those sampling years across the habitat types. Here you can see if you look at thicket, which is fourth from the right, you've got a high proportion of thicket habitat in the park. In 1999, there was very little transects done in thicket. I can only imagine why. I would hate to do transects in that. That was then increased in 2003 and decreased slightly again in 2007. So that's perhaps something that's not so great. We perhaps want to put more samples into that habitat type. If you look at forest, so that basically refers to your scarp forest, which is protected in HIP. You've got that black bar indicates a relatively small proportion of the park, but you can see that the samples, there was a high proportion of plots sampled in that habitat type, which is great because it is a priority habitat type. So you would want to stick a large proportion of your transects in there to pick up the effect of elephants and other browsers on them. Does the data indicate which species are preferred by elephants, and are these species adequately sampled? There were 33 species where greater than 25% of the individuals recorded showed elephant utilization. So I'm not picking out any type of elephant utilization, it's just a blanket elephant utilization. If you look at the top one, Casonia zuluensis, 80% of the population that was sampled had been utilized by elephant, but there's only 5 trees sampled. And this is, I said there are 33 species where greater than 25% have been utilized. You can see by the bottom here, by the cassine, we're only on 35% of the population, so there's still a good few species below that. But you can see with the exception of something like Sapium and Albizia, that most of them have only got a few individuals that have been sampled. So it's not a great sample size for these species that are being targeted by elephants. Does the data provide detail on the effects elephants are having on the woody plant structure and composition? It does. It provides detailed information on the browsing behavior of the elephants, which species, height classes, vegetation types are selected for the different types of feeding, which are damaged, but the plots weren't sampled at a frequency that can elucidate the drivers of all of these impacts. One of the other questions was looking at the demographics of acacia nigrescens throughout the park, current impact of elephant and other agents on large individual acacia nigrescens individuals, and then obviously to look at the reasons for the poor recruitment. So other studies have indicated that there's poor recruitment of acacia nigrescens into taller height classes. You can see a very pretty bell-shaped curve. Black bars are obviously the samples, number of individuals, acacia nigrescens individuals sampled in 99. The white is then 2003 and the grey 2007. What you can see is that you appear to be losing a lot of your individuals in the group, in the age, or the heights from about 4 meters through to about 8 meters. Those number of individuals seem to have decreased. But very interestingly, there's a large number of more individuals in your small height class of less than 1 meter by the time you get through to 2007. So, sort of as Joris would say, a pathway conclusion. Plants aren't used in relation to their abundance, Rare species and plants that are selected for by elephants are underrepresented in the data set. I haven't got the time to go through the lengthy list of conclusions that we came up with the data that we looked at. But there's a long list of them that support or contradict earlier studies that were done on parts of the data set. So that's why it's always a good idea to be able to have sort of long-term data and to be able to analyze it over a longer time period. All of the results and conclusions will be used to inform an updated vegetation monitoring plan. So that's one of the reasons, obviously linked through to the elephant management plan, but we're wanting to develop an updated vegetation monitoring plan, focusing more on some of these things that have been left out or not being sampled particularly well. And then this monitoring plan won't only focus on vegetation-related concerns, but also include effects of tree nesting vultures. And then elephant spatial use. 2 elephant herds in the park have been collared since 2006. These collars were provided by Kevin Duffy. The collars, oh, I missed the 5 minutes. The collars download will record GPS points every 30 minutes. And then these were used to produce these maps or home ranges of elephants. So the top A and B is one herd, C and D is a separate herd, and then the maps on the left-hand side refer to the summer range, and on the winter is on the right. So you can see these 2 herds don't really spend much time together. What it does indicate though, and this is only 2 herds out of potentially 17 or so herds, it indicates that the whole park is utilized by elephants. There may not be adequate time between visits, elephant visits to certain areas to allow the vegetation to recover, especially in the scarp forest, which is right up in the north of the park. So if you look at A and B, right in the top, the elephants spend a lot of time there. So we may require other methods of creating movement across the landscape. And then the final little bit, we looked at vegetation visitation hotspots. So we created grid squares across the park, and using that collar data, looked at how often elephants visited those blocks. And then we compared that to so those hotspots are obviously those white areas, and the black areas are then where elephants hardly ever visit. We've been told to stop. And then we looked at the location of 2007 vegetation plots in relation to the high, medium, and low visitation rates, and then saw that grid cells that are visited 1 to 200 times are well represented in the vegetation plots. Cells that are never visited or are visited often are very poorly represented. So future monitoring needs a more even spread of plots. So final conclusions: exceptionally high growth rate of the introduced elephants. The movements cover the whole extent of the park. Plants are not used in relation to their abundance. Rare plants and plants selected for by elephants aren't well represented in the existing data. So we need an adjusted vegetation monitoring program. And then additionally, there's other things that I haven't mentioned as well. So we've got various other plans, but they haven't all been implemented because all supporting data to justify interventions are not yet available. Thanks very much.